Hello, guys. Sorry I'm late. Not my fault this time. StreamYard, the software that we use for these broadcasts, has been having issues. Anyway, we seem to be on now, so I can introduce my guest. Here he is, Angelos Sofocleos. Hi, Angelos. Can you say your microphone's muted? Can you unmute, please?
That's okay now? Yeah. Thanks for the invite.
Yep,
Glad
that's
to be
good.
here.
Yeah. So, am I saying your name right, first of all?
So it's Angelos with a hard G.
Angelos, right?
That's correct. And then Sophocleos.
Sophocleos. Well, may I say it's a very suitably Greek name for a philosopher.
Thanks from Sophocles. I hope I can, can be like him.
Yes. Well, we'd all like that, I think. So, tell us a bit about yourself. You've just completed your master's, I believe, and now, where did you do your master's? Was it Newcastle?
I was in Durham, so I did my bachelor's and master's in Durham University.
And now you're doing a PhD at York, I believe?
That's correct, yeah. Doing a PhD at the University of York. I'm focusing on phenomenology, specifically on phenomenology of depression and other mental illnesses. So analyzing what it's like to be depressed, what the experience of depression involves.
Yes, well, that's a very worthy investigation. There's a lot of people who would like to make some understanding of depression, I think.
Certainly.
Anyway, tonight we're going to talk about logic. And as you know, I'm a retired science teacher, not a philosopher. But that doesn't stop me from having some views, of course. So I'm trying to learn about philosophy, and I will seek your advice on some of the opinions that I have. What I'd like you to start off with, because I think you made fame or notoriety recently, didn't you, by getting no platformed at Bristol University? Can you tell us about that?
So I'll go back to August 2018 when because at the time I was writing on transgender issues and sex and gender and the biology of sex and issues relating to gender. I made a retweet of another tweet that the tweet read, "Women don't have penises." So that led to a series of firings and resignations from Durham University newspapers and from Humanists UK. And then as the events unfolded, I was invited from Bristol University Free Speech Society to speak at their event in February 2019. And as the event, as they started advertising the event and publicizing the event, Bristol Students' Union stepped in and said that my involvement in the event could cause violence or could cause some disruption in the university. And this was ironic and kind of comical because it would be a discussion on free speech, whether universities have a problem with free speech. That was the exact title of the event and what the event would be for. So Bristol Student Union gave the answer themselves. So in the end, I attended the event as an audience member, and I was then invited on the panel, as I would have been invited after requests from other panel members and from other audience members. So nothing had happened at the event. It went on as normal. People voiced their opinions without any disruptions and in a civilized manner. But I feel this event and other events that we witnessed recently in the past few years show that we have a problem with free speech at universities. Well, I can't speak for the UK, but we can see similar things happening in the US and Canada. So this is becoming of a much bigger problem that we haven't anticipated.
Indeed, yes, it is deeply ironic that the free speech society should deny you freedom of speech. Or not them, but the Students' Union should.
Was the Students' Union, yeah.
Yes, yes. It's a strange phenomenon because I go back a very long way, and when I was doing my first degree, students, this was back in the 1960s, students, they challenged opinions. And the odd thing is now they stifle them. It's changed from a democracy to a dictatorship where disagreement is forbidden. We used to counter opinions that we didn't like with argument rather than muzzling. So I'm not in favor of no platforming at all.
Exactly. That's the right thing to do when opposing or challenging some opinions you don't like. You let them, you expose them, you challenge them, and ridicule them publicly, so that people can see what are the exact problems with that ideology.
Yes,
and that ideology might be fascism or white supremacy. We cannot just isolate that ideology. I mean, we often see such ideologies like white supremacy and anti-Semitism being labeled as viruses, and this is a very timely description as well. But there is, and that's a valid comparison, but we must differentiate between what I term as social viruses and what are biological viruses. So when you have a biological virus, as we witness now, you try to isolate people, both people who have the virus and people who don't have the virus, so that they don't get exposed to the virus and get infected. But the thing is, we cannot do this with social viruses. The first reasons this cannot be done with social viruses, such as fascism and white supremacy, is that people who get isolated, they have the opportunity to reorganize themselves and infect the healthy part of society. So a good analogy would be if the people with coronavirus were ill-intentioned and wanted to infect the rest of society, wouldn't be enough to just isolate them. So just to restrict them at the hospital or somewhere in particular. And the second reason is that what causes we must be person focused and not idea focused. We must be focused on in a way changing the minds of people, and by simply isolating, we're not changing their mind, and we're not seeing the real roots of society, of the social virus. So if education or bad parenting caused white supremacists, then by simply isolating adult white supremacists will not solve the problem. We need to reach to the root of the problem in a similar manner with the coronavirus. If this was caused by someone in China eating a butt, then this practice cannot continue. So we need to reach to the root of the problem.
In a sense, by no platforming people that you disagree with, you're giving them a sort of spurious credibility. You're saying these ideas are important enough for us to stop them saying them, which is exactly the wrong thing to do. So anyway, thank you for that. What we're supposed to be talking about in the main part of this program, and we've only got about an hour, is logic. So you came and spoke to our skeptics in the pub group a couple of years ago, didn't you? And now that we are no longer able to assemble in the pub, this is the nearest thing we can do, the skeptics in the hub version. So could you just give us a bit of a brief outline of what logic is? I mean, I think it's a type of reasoning. Would that be right?
That would be right, yes. It's would be the type of reasoning that we have. We can describe logic as, simply put, as the science of valid inference. So it's deriving conclusions from premises. So it's the correct way to phrase arguments and structure arguments. And logic is both regards itself with structure of arguments and also content. So how to structure arguments that are structurally valid, and also how to structure arguments which are convincing.
Yes. So in other words, it's the best sort of thinking that we have, isn't it?
Exactly.
And can you just give us a run through the three different types of syllogism, the deduction, induction, and abduction? Can you give us a very brief idea of those?
Of course. So, as you correctly said, we have three types of arguments. We can say deductive logic, inductive logic, and abductive logic. So deductive logic, a simple way to put it, is that it goes from the general to the specific. So we make a general observation about the world, or we pose some general premises about the world, and then we move to making more specific observations about the world. And we can relate deductive logic with structure of an argument. So let's see an example. An example would be to have premise 1, all men are mortal. Premise 2, Socrates is a man. What follows from that? Socrates is mortal. So this is an example of deductive logic. We started with a general observation that all men are mortal, and then moved to a more specific observation that Socrates is mortal. And the thing with deductive logic is, if it's a valid argument, then it has to be the case that once we have true premises, then the conclusion must also be true. That's what validity means in logic. So having the two premises that all men are mortal and Socrates is a man, then it must necessarily follow that Socrates is mortal. It cannot be otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
And because we concern ourselves with structure here, we can have other examples of structure in deductive logic. For example, premise 1, either A or B. Either A or B is true. Premise 2, not A. conclusion, therefore B. That follows from the two premises. If either B or A are true and A is not true, then B has to be true. So, and we have different other examples, such as some famous examples of arguments, such as modus ponens and modus tollens, which we can see and analyze later. Now, going to inductive statements. Previously, we said about deductive statements that we go from the general to the specific. Now, inductive statements go from the specific to the general. We make a specific observation about the world, and then we generalize it. So, some examples would be all swans I've seen in my life are white. Therefore, all swans are white. So the swans I've seen in my life are, of course, a small sample of all swans that exist. So from a small sample, which I consider representative, I make conclusions about the general population of swans. Or another example would be if I have a bag of coins and I pull a coin from the bag and it's a penny, then I take another coin and it's also a penny, then another coin and it's also a penny. I might deduce from that all the coins in a bag are pennies. However, the obvious problem that we have with inductive statements, in contrast with deductive statements, is that the conclusion is not guaranteed by the truth of the premise. It's only a generalized version of the premise that is not necessarily true. The fact that I've seen some white swans doesn't necessarily mean that all swans are white. Of course, this differs in the kind of example that we're using. We could say that I put my hand in the stove 20 times and I got my hand burned. So that means that if I put my hand on the stove like 100 times, then it will also burn. That's a more probable conclusion. But the thing with inductive statements is that the truth of the premise doesn't necessarily guarantee the truth of the conclusion. It only makes it probable. Now, with abductive statements, simply put, abductive statements are we also start from a specific observation, and we try to infer what might have caused that observation or that state of affairs that we just observed from probabilities. So if I go into my room and I see that the window is open and all my papers are on the floor, then I will deduce from that probably the wind blown and got in from the window and threw all papers in the floor. But of course, a lot of other things could have happened. A burglar could have entered my room looking for something and caused all the mess, or even aliens could have come into my room and caused the mess. So it's according to the basis of probabilities what caused the specific situation, and also on the basis of simplicity. We try to find the simpler conclusion and the one which requires the fewer assumptions.
That's Occam's razor there, isn't it?
That's exactly, yeah. That's
Mhm.
exactly Occam's razor. Trying to deducing that the one that the explanation for something is the one that's one with fewer assumptions.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Now, I get involved in a lot of debates with believers, with members of a faith, and they want to present me an argument for their God, whichever it might be, and they insist that I refute or counter their argument. And if I can't do that, or if I don't do that, they consider themselves to have won. Now, my position is a bit different because it seems to me that a deductive argument requires complete knowledge. Your premises must be certain and true. Whereas an inductive argument acknowledges that we don't have complete knowledge, and that it does the best it can with, an incomplete data set. Whereas the abductive reasoning accepts that we have very little knowledge, and all we're trying to do is fill in a gap, really, with an outcome which is the least unlikely, if you like. What do you think about that?
Exactly. That's, yeah, I
Great.
agree with what you said. And and since you mentioned believers as well, they tend to think that all arguments that science uses are deductive, that scientists are absolutely certain about whatever
Yeah.
they say, and that their conclusions must be necessarily true, given their supposedly necessarily true premises.
They love certainty, and they desire it, and they think that science provides it, and they're wrong. It's not
Exactly,
available.
because we can say that most of science uses inductive statements.
Yes. Yeah.
Making general observations from more specific observations that are we might be 99% certain that they are true and that they will continue to be true, but we can never be 100% certain that they will continue to that, let's say, laws of nature will continue to operate tomorrow.
We can't be certain, but we think it's highly likely.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I would contend, coming from the position of a retired science teacher, that even in the case of deduction, where you are going from the general to the specific, you can't be sure that you have complete knowledge. I would say that apart from definitions, like the example you gave of, what was it? The philosopher was a man, and what was it? Give me the example again, please.
Yeah, so we have premise 1, all men are mortal.
Yep.
Premise 2, Socrates is a man.
Yep.
Therefore, conclusion, Socrates is mortal.
Yes. Well, I would say that depends on definitions. That depends on the meaning of the word man, the meaning of the word mortal, and probably the meaning of the word, what was his name? Aristophanes? No, the other one.
Socrates, Plato.
Socrates, yes,
Socrates.
yes. And we can't be sure that those definitions are absolutely true, simply because we live in a universe that has time. And in order for something to be completely true, absolutely true, it must be always true. Otherwise, you have the problem of deciding how much time is adequate to describe it as true. And we know that it wasn't always true for Aristophanes or Plato or any of the other philosophers, because they didn't always exist.
Exactly.
Humans have only been around about 200,000 years. The universe is something like 13.8 billion years old. And for most of that time, it wasn't true to say that Aristophanes and Plato and the other great ancient Greek philosophers were men. They simply didn't exist. So my contention is that even in the case of deductive logic, the premises that are required to be true cannot be guaranteed to be true. Another example that's often given is that all men are bachelors, and therefore I can't remember this one. What is it? An unmarried man is a bachelor. It's a silly example, and you'll probably remember it for me. But it boils down to definitions of actually what we mean. We make the words mean, and those are human fabrications. We have simply chosen to make those words mean that. So as far as finding out new information is concerned, it's no use. It's very unusually helpful for the discovery of new information. I can think of one case where you can do a sort of armchair deduction about something, and you can therefore prove that it is the case. But that's unusual. I mean, a more common example would be Ptolemy, who deduced that the Earth was the center of the solar system because he saw the sun rise and set, and therefore, since it goes across the top of the sky, it must go underneath during the night. And that was, at the time, a very convincing argument. But then the telescope was invented, and the whole thing was reversed, and we now know how wrong he was. So, to my mind, that is a problem with the deduction. It boils down to a tautology. You start off saying something, Tanny, you start off saying something as a premise, and then you reword it as an inference at the end, it's taught us nothing.
Exactly. You raised a few issues here, which I completely agree with.
Okay.
So you said about the problems of deductive logic, and I agree with what you said. And to add to that, it would be good to visit validity and soundness in logic. So validity, as I said previously, concerns itself with the structure of an argument. In logic, when we talk about validity, we only talk about the structure of an argument. So a valid argument basically is one that guarantees the truth of the conclusion given the truth of the premises. So just revisiting the example we gave previously, if either A or B is true and A is not true, then it follows that that B is true. So we can put whatever we want for A or B, and we will still have a valid argument.
The form will be valid.
Exactly. So that's what seems to concern theists or religious people. Now, and they might have valid arguments, but the important point here is having a sound argument. So soundness concerns itself with the content of an argument. So we want our premises and the conclusions to actually be true. So we can have an example of an argument which is valid but not sound. So we can have a argument such as premise 1, all ducks are mammals. Premise 2, Daffy Duck is a duck. Conclusion, Daffy Duck is a mammal.
Mm-hmm.
That's a valid argument.
Mm-hmm.
But of course it's not sound.
Mm.
Because it's not true that it's not true that all ducks are mammals, and it's not true that Daffy Duck is a mammal, and it's questionable whether Daffy Duck can really be considered a duck. And that takes me to the problem you said about the words we use and their meaning. That these changes throughout history, the way we use them changes, their actual meaning changes.
Mm-hmm.
So these are some of the problems that Wittgenstein also noticed, that we can never be sure that we are talking about the same thing when we use the same word about something. And yeah, so we can say that we can only know something to the best of our knowledge. We cannot be absolutely certain about something.
So deductive argument is on the loser, it seems to me, just because we can never be certain of anything. Now, you raised this point about words changing their meaning, and they do, don't they? I mean, when I was a boy, we could say the word gay, and we just meant joyfully happy. But of course, that's changed its meaning enormously during my lifetime. And of course, this is why we choose the ancient Greek and Latin roots to form our technical words and our scientific terms. It's because those languages are no longer spoken, so they're less likely to change their meaning.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
Now,
yeah.
Moving on to induction, it seems to me that induction starts out by admitting uncertainty. It doesn't claim to have premises which are supposed to be true. In fact, we tend to use the word propositions rather than premises in induction. Would that be right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes. So we're giving away the idea of certainty and truth in inductive logic. And the result of that is the inference, the outcome of the syllogism, at least it was discovered or worked out in the Renaissance, that is not a reliable statement, but it is something which needs to be tested for probability by investigating for a match with observations in the natural realm. Because I like to think of philosophy of logic as happening inside here. It's thought. And thought is limitless. We can think of Humpty Dumpty, and Goldilocks. So what we really need to do is compare what we've come up with in here with what's out there, because that's not influenced by our imagination. And if we observe something, what we then have to do is match it or not with our thoughts. And this is the principle of scientific method.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Then that could someone say is the problem with deductive logic, which cannot just do armchair philosophy and just making general observations about what's the case in the world without actually going out in the world and having some experiences of what the world contains and how the world actually is. And yeah, you're right that in inductive statements we don't have we have a statement, but it's not necessarily true, and from that follows that the conclusion is not necessarily true either. So the way to confirm a conclusion that all swans are white is to have a big enough sample of swans that I can safely say that that all swans are white, which is in fact a false statement. There have been observations of black swans.
Yeah.
But most people will not have seen a black swan. So if they make the conclusion that all swans are white based just on their limited personal observations, then they will have a false conclusion. So there comes the necessity and importance of science, that we take a big enough sample and we run as many experiments as are required for us to increase the probability that what we say is right.
Likely to be the case. Yes, of course, in New Zealand, black swans, I think, are the most common variety. But I think you're right in that we need a big sample, but we can never have a complete data set except in a limited domain, can we? I mean, we could say, for example, that this glass has no beer in it. Hang on a minute. This glass has no beer in it because we can examine the inside of this glass and eliminate any beer from possibly being in there.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't do that with the universe. It's not a limited domain. So there is no way we can ever have, as far as we can tell at the moment, a complete data set that would give us the certainty required for deduction.
Exactly, and the problem still persists with the observation that there is no beer in your glass, because based on our experience, and our scientific knowledge, we wouldn't say that it's possible for glass to turn into beer, or for water to turn into beer in some way. But that's not impossible. That's not something that we can be certain that will not happen. So yeah, we can never be absolutely certain about anything, and especially when it comes to the universe, which is vast.
So there is no certainty. I like that. Everything is relative.
Mm-hmm.
Now, abduction. I like to think of abduction. It's the inference to the best explanation, isn't it? And
Mm-hmm.
it's a sort of a negative outcome. It's not an argument for a proposition. It's just an argument against the alternatives. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, by giving reasons as to why something is the case, you at the same time give reasons as to why the opposite is not the case. So we can also think of it, as a process of elimination.
Yes.
So by eliminating what cannot or couldn't have happened, then we stay with what we think has happened.
What is left after we've done the elimination? Yes. This, of course, is the famous Sherlock Holmes quote, isn't it? How often have I said to you, Watson, that when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a sort of version of abduction?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I like the contrast between impossible and improbable. We have to make we have to say that there is a difference. We have to make the distinction.
Yes, yes. A lot of people use those words as though they're synonyms, as though they're interchangeable, and they're not. Yes. So, what else did you say that made me think?
Just to add something, given however improbable something might be, given the law of the big numbers, of the large numbers, that thing will eventually happen at some point. So, however improbable.
Oh, sorry, let me turn that off. Sorry, I'm making a show. Bye-bye. Sorry about that. So what is the difference between this and a God of the gaps argument? Between abduction, where you've made an argument by eliminating rather than giving actual positive evidence for something, you've just eliminated all the alternatives. How does that differ from a God of the gaps?
Well, first, the God of the gaps argument, just to explain what it is when religious people or theists will say that something happened because of God, or when we don't know the reason something happened, religious people would say it's God that did it. And usually this comes when there is no explanation for something, or if they cannot think of an explanation about something. Now, there is two problems here and two reasons as to why that's different of an abductive statement. First, that it doesn't seem to be the case that God or the God explanation is the most probable scenario. And that's because we said that in abduction we make we will use the explanation that has the fewest assumptions. But the God explanation has lots of assumptions itself. We cannot just pose God and just be done with the argument. We need to explain what kind of God this entity is. What are its attributes? Is it all loving, or all powerful, or omnipresent, omnibenevolent? So this involves a number of assumptions as well, and that's the reason it cannot be the best explanation about something that we don't have the knowledge of. So the best way to go in this kind of scenarios is just to suspend judgment. We must be safe to say that we don't know, or we're not certain about something. And most of the time when religious people pose the God of the gaps argument, is because they are afraid of saying that they don't know something, while we mustn't be we must be comfortable with saying I don't know.
Yes, it comes back to that desire for certainty, doesn't it? But as you say, there's nothing bad about admitting ignorance. We should boldly do it. It's honest and honorable to say, I don't know. Yes.
Exactly.
Now, a better example of an abductive argument would be the iridium layer, wouldn't it? And you know what I'm referring to here? In geology, in the strata, there's a very thin layer of a black deposit which is rich in iridium. That is an element that is otherwise very rare on Earth. And so it's puzzled scientists for a long time how it came to be there. And the best explanation is that it was delivered by meteors coming from outer space, which were rich in iridium, and that's why it's worldwide. It's in this particular depth of the strata. And so the evidence for that is the fact that we know that the Earth was being heavily bombarded at that time. And we have found meteorites that survived the journey through the atmosphere and discovered that they are, some of them, exceptionally rich in this element, iridium. And so putting the 2 and 2 together, we can make the 5 of assuming that the iridium layer was due to a bombardment from space by meteors and asteroids. That's a better abductive argument, isn't it, than God of the Gap?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
We have actual evidence there, don't we?
Mm-hmm. So that proved that it's best to suspend judgment and continue working on finding an explanation.
Yes. Now, this brings us to what we mean by argument and evidence. I've got to sit back, otherwise I have holes in my head. So what I'd like to do now, perhaps while I get this up, I'm going to try and screen a diagram. I'm not sure quite how I'm going to get it. I have to go into my other documents. Maybe while I'm doing this, you would perhaps give us some idea of what actually went on at the Renaissance when natural philosophy was invented.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean there?
Yeah. So there we can visit the debate between rationalists and empiricists. So we, starting from ancient Greece, we have this conception of philosophy being empirical. So if we look at Plato's dialogues, for example, we see experience playing a major role in arguments. Experience, also feelings, or also how one might have viewed the world from their own perspective. So we have a lot of going out in the world and then making philosophy. Now, what changed in on the rationalist position? We have this emergence of thinking being a computation or a calculation, something that starting from Descartes, we could say that philosophy can be done in your office chair, and from your office chair you could find how the world looks like or discover truths about the world. We can also Hobbes and Leibniz. Hobbes said that thinking is a calculation. Leibniz, who concerned himself a lot with language, said that language can be computed. So we witness this wave of philosophers considering philosophy to be rational and living experience out of philosophy. And this isn't to say that philosophy and mathematics or logic have no connection. For example, Boole saw some similarity between algebra and logic, which later influenced logicians such as Frege. But yeah, in medieval times we saw that contrast between empiricists and rationalists that kind of continues to this day.
It seems to me that they came to the realization that what goes on inside here doesn't necessarily or essentially match what's out there.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. And I think phenomenologists in the 20th century have provided enough evidence for that. And it's the case that philosophy needs to be also experienced. It's not just a calculation.
Right. Now, in an attempt to clear up this, the difference between argument, what goes on inside a head, and evidence, which is observations of what's outside a head, I've produced a table, and I'd like you and I to discuss it, and we can pull it apart, point out where it's nonsense, maybe agree with bits of it. Are you willing to do that with me?
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
So I'm going to share my screen so that you can see. Wait a minute, I haven't done it right. Share screen. Right, now I can do this, and I can do, tell me when you, no, it's not working, is it? What am I not doing right? Oh, I know. I want to do this, and then I want to do this. Can you see that?
I can see that, yes.
Right, so here's my table. What do you think about this?
Let's see. I cannot see that now.
No? Oh, sorry.
Go back to the
Yep.
document. Yeah.
Sorry, there you go then.
Yeah. I think, yeah, on the first sight, that all makes sense to me. We could analyze some of the points you have here. Let's visit the second row.
Mm-hmm.
That arguments avoid falsification, while repetition of something removes doubt. I think that's certainly correct. We since you mentioned religious arguments for the existence of God before, these are called arguments because they have been posed by some religious philosophers, and they just await falsification for what they claim to be the case. However, we must not say that as long as something has not been falsified or proven to be invalid or having inconsistent premises, it doesn't mean that it's true. In the first instance, it might be that something needs to be falsifiable, right?
Yes.
If someone, and that goes back to the work of Karl Popper. So,
yeah.
if we have something that we cannot explain with current science, and someone develops the argument that God did it, then that statement is not falsifiable itself. It cannot be considered right until someone comes and provides a counter argument, because there cannot be a counter argument. That it cannot be proven that it's God that did something. It's not a premise or a statement that can be tested or be put in a laboratory. So it's very important when we make arguments to make falsifiable arguments, to make arguments that can be proven false, that provide the opportunity for them to be proven false.
Yeah, so that's interesting, because you use the word proof or proven, and I would contend that proof and proven are concepts that we haven't been able to find evidence for in the natural realm. And so I would say that they reside in the conceptual realm, which is why scientists don't use those words, and why scientists have to use the word evidence, because there is no proof, because proof requires absoluteness, and it's not available. You can have proof in geometry, for example, where we make up concepts like a point has a location but no area, or a line has a length but no width. But those things don't actually exist except in our heads.
Exactly. It's always proven within the system that we created, whether that system is mathematics. So it's proven within the mathematical systems we created. In law, in court as well, when someone is proven guilty, that doesn't mean that they are actually guilty, if we can make this distinction, but they are guilty within the system of law that we created.
Yes. If law always produced accurate results of guilt, then we wouldn't need appeal courts, would we?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
So you also mentioned algebra, and I would contend that all of maths, in fact, like logic, is in the conceptual realm. We've invented it. It's in our brains, and it doesn't have to be. Some people like to think that maths is discovered, and I don't. I think it's invented, and I think we know the names of some of the great inventors of mathematical ideas, and we should credit them for their inventions. And the reason that it fits with a lot of what we observe is a tribute to the skill of the mathematicians, rather than an indication that it is actually out there waiting to be discovered.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I generally agree with what you've said. I don't really specialize on the philosophy of mathematics, so I don't have a strong views in that area. I would tend to also say that mathematics is invented as well as logic. The argument which kind of haven't found a way to challenge would be, if let's say we had discovered an alien civilization, we would expect them to have the same mathematics as we do, and the same rules of logic as we do. I would be surprised if in alien mathematics 1 + 1 resulted to 3, for example. That seems to be a very fundamental something very fundamental about not just about mathematics, but about the world, that 1 + 1 = 2. However, even our most fundamental rules of logic, and now we're going back to Aristotle, who developed the 3 basic rules of logic, which were later also developed by Russell. So, for example, the law of identity, that put very simply, whatever is. So if we have sentence A being Bertrand Russell is smoking, so Bertrand Russell is smoking cannot mean anything else than what it says. Then we have the... Sorry?
Sorry? I interrupted you accidentally. I'm sorry. You want to finish what you were saying? Bertrand Russell?
Just to finish with the other 2 rules of logic. We have the law of contradiction, law of non-contradiction, that A cannot be both true and not true at the same time. So it cannot be the case that Bertrand Russell is and is not smoking. And from that we get the law of the excluded middle, which is that it must be necessarily the case of either A or not A. It must be the case that either Bertrand Russell is smoking, and or it must be the case that Bertrand Russell is not smoking. However, we can say that quantum discoveries in quantum mechanics have challenged some of these premises, not premises, laws of logic, which we considered very fundamental. One example is Schrodinger's experiments that showed that particle can be both be and not be at the same time, and he used this example with a cat, the cat being alive and dead at the same time. So yeah, we see that even our most fundamental conceptions of logic and mathematics can perhaps be challenged.
Yes, indeed. Can we address some of the points, the comments that people have produced for us?
Of course.
Would a point not have a very small area? Well, it's not allowed to. The definition of a point, according to mathematics, is it has a location but no area. So then there's this one. Why can't a good explanation be as good as a good argument, say, be as good as the Big Bang? Well, it's a good argument, but until observations match it, it's not a conclusion. I would say I like to use the word inference for the outcome of arguments, and conclusions for the matching of an argument or a proposition or a hypothesis with an observation. I think that's the science bit, where the observation and the idea come together, and then they either match or they don't, and that's what gives us a conclusion. But this is just my usage of the words.
Mm-hmm.
So I also wanted to get you to say something about logical fallacies, Angelos. Would you do that?
Yeah. Absolutely. So in the beginning, we had talked about that deductive logic and logic in general is also about argumentation and ways to phrase arguments and how to sound convincing. However, it's the case that sometimes we make some errors in our way of thinking, which we can describe as logical fallacies. So I'll just go through a few logical fallacies that we are susceptible of doing in our everyday lives, and we can also be cautious to not use them, so that we can have solid arguments. So the first example, which is the most common and the one that's most used, we can say, is ad hominem. That's Latin for to the person. So it's when we attack a characteristic of a person in an attempt to attack their argument. So an example would be Martin Heidegger was a Nazi, and so whatever his views, they will be inaccurate. Martin Heidegger was indeed a Nazi, but he's also the one of the most respected and the biggest phenomenologists that we have, and he greatly contributed in the area of phenomenology. That doesn't make him endorsing the Nazi Party any less severe, but we cannot attack his arguments just by looking at who he was as a person. We must be able to differentiate the person from the argument.
Yes, that's the skeptic's motto, of course, isn't it? Respect people, challenge ideas. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Now, this
another example will be ad populum.
Yes.
That's to the people. So just saying that, just arguing that the position is true because it's held by many people. An example would be in a court of law, the jury votes by majority, and they will therefore always make the right decision. We know that the public or the majority does not always make the right decisions, and the amount of people that believe something does not make it true.
Correct. Yes. I'm not going to mention certain issues that I easily could. And the other one, of course, is ad antiquitatem, isn't it? That fallacy.
Perhaps I don't know its Latin name, which...
From tradition. The idea that because
we
believe something for a long time, it must be true.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. The fact that something has been the case in the past does not make it necessary that it's true, or that's the case now.
No. A lot of foolish things were believed in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this question here, but surely all evidence is open to interpretation. Well, my view on that is yes, but you're now moving away from evidence into conclusion. My position on this is that evidence is observation, and that's it. And what you determine that observation might mean, how you interpret that observation, you've stopped observing now, you're going into trying to draw a conclusion. So my position is that if the actual observations are open to interpretation, then you don't have evidence. What you have is opinion.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I think we haven't said before, we talked a lot about uncertainty in science, and we do have uncertainty in science, but what we didn't stress or emphasize is that uncertainties in science does not give any credit to non-scientific opinions.
No.
We can say that a scientist is not certain about something, or science does not currently have the answer about something, but this doesn't mean anything about science itself as a discipline, and it certainly doesn't make the way for the theist or anyone who is not a scientist make up their own explanations, and then arguing that they have the same validity as scientific explanations.
Yes, this came across very clearly last week when we had a discussion on pandemics. I don't know whether you've watched it, but we had 3 scientists on who were very cagey about what they said. They didn't make any definitive statements because, of course, we don't have any definitive answers about this new virus. And but there's no disgrace in that. And as you say, just because we don't know doesn't mean you can shoehorn your favorite Zeus into as the answer to the problem.
Exactly. Not to put it simply, not all views are equal.
Yes. Ignorance is no evidence for anything.
Mhm.
Right. So what's this one here? I'm trying to put this one online. There are things that are discovered in maths, such as the millionth digit of pi, or the fact it's a very large number, or the topology of the Mandelbrot set. Well, that's true, and but it's entirely conceptual. What we are doing in maths and in science as a whole is making models. Some of our best models are very good. They're like maps that are an almost perfect match for the territory. But that doesn't stop them being maps.
Mhm.
So although the Mandelbrot set explains or models the formation of that lovely version of broccoli, what is it? That green broccoli with the florets that are increasingly small but always repetitively patterned. What's that one called? I can't remember. Somebody tell me the name of this wonderful broccoli. It's delicious. And it fits the Mandelbrot set. But that's only because Mr. Mandelbrot was very good at coming up with an explanation, a mathematical model, I should say, for that patterning. And even Einstein declared that maths was thought. And I'm not going to argue with him.
Certainly, we can have discoveries in sets that we invented. That's plausible.
Here's a long comment.
Okay.
All 3 of the above, yes. Yes. Do you know what I'm going to say, though? Because we've done over an hour, and I try to keep these programs to an hour. I'm going to say thank you very much to Angelos. Thank you very much to everybody watching. Please continue. There will be comments below, and you can continue to discuss and debate the points we've made. And I'll probably join in, and I hope Angelos will too.
Thank you very much, John. It's been a pleasure.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, there we go. That's another one done.